Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. You can hear me okay?
Can you hear me?
Well, yeah, and I've got the recording already on, so I don't forget that.
That's a good idea.
How are you finding the juggle, motherhood and work?
Yeah, obviously it takes a bit of time to get used to, but yeah, I'm lucky that Griffith is pretty flexible when it comes to work times, and like I can work from home. I do a split. It's nice actually to get out and be in the office and leave all the mess behind.
I agree with you. I went back to work when my little ones were both 7 months old, and I just needed it. Yeah, I've just realised I need to check our registrations to see if we've had any last minute ones come in, because I just bear with me a second, because we've had one more come in. Let me have a look at who this is.
Yeah, no problem. Do you want me to try and share my screen to see if you can see it?
Yeah, sure, that's a great idea.
I mean, it should be pretty simple, but can you see it?
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, I can see it.
Oh, easy. All right, well, I'll just stop it for now.
Yeah, all right, cool. I'm just gonna zone out for 1 second and check. I've got 3 other people registered, so I better send them the link. I didn't even think about we couldn't work out how to automate that. So people that are like last minute registering, yeah, we just have to manually check it. Anyway, I probably should have done that an hour ago.
That's all right. Got time.
Yes, we do. It's pretty good though. I was pretty happy with the number of, we've got 28 registered now, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, even if not everyone attends, then people will probably get a link to the recording, or they'll look at the recording. Plus, some people may have not registered, but they might still look at the recordings later on. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's fine if people get the recording too, isn't it? Because that's the way most people tend to do it, a bit later.
Yeah, and I mean, people are busy, and if that happens to me. You want to attend a webinar, but it clashes with something else, and sometimes it's just easier to just catch up whenever you can fit it in. That's right. I guess you kind of miss that live discussion or interaction, but if something is really burning, I mean, people know how to contact you, and I've got my email there, but you can always forward my contact details as well if anything else comes up, or Yeah.
All right. All right, I'm just going to check who the other 3 are. And the list. Of course, it's not going to be easy for me to do it now that I'm trying to rush. Never mind.
How was your holiday?
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you. It was just so nice to get to a surf beach.
Oh, well, actually, you send out those links first and then.
Okay. Yeah, just 1 second. I'm nearly there. Okay, done. Done with 7 minutes to go. Oh, well, anyway, there was only one extra one. There was 2 internals, which I had invited, so it was fine. There's just one extra one that I didn't know. I don't know. Did you recognise any of the names from the attendees? Did you have a look?
I had a look at the the overview that you sent, but I didn't see all the names. I just saw the the 3 most recent ones.
Yeah, no, it was quite interesting who like there was some people I definitely don't know that have registered, so they're not from here. So that was pretty interesting.
That's cool. Serena shared your invite through the Griffith Institute for Tourism, and I think one of the social media sites. So maybe some people came through there. Yeah.
All right. So the plan. I'm going to do the little intro like normal. Yeah, and then I'll hand over to you. Obviously, I'll try and we'll try and keep everyone muted during the thing.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there. Hi, Claire. Claire's our communications consultant. She's sitting in the other room. I didn't let her come in here because otherwise it gets all funny with the noise.
Yeah, there's like an echo. Hi, Claire.
I'm trying to let people. Hi. I'm trying to let people bypass. People in my everyone. Oh, here we go. Everyone.
No, it's just prepping.
All right. Trying to let everyone just come in and out without having to access.
I just done it now. If I was to hang up, does that take me out of the group? Obviously, yes.
I think I've worked it out. I had it just set that people that work here can come in.
Okay, cool. I'm taking myself off.
Hi, Lee.
Hi.
How you going?
Hey, good.
Good.
Hi, Johanna.
Hi, Lee. Nice to meet you.
You too. Looking forward to today.
Lee's our climate change resilience officer leading the Whitsunday Healthy Heart project.
Exciting. Yeah, I think I read that somewhere, so I recognize your face from a photo. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Johanna worked on the original brief with us for the project.
Ah, okay. I'm often referring back to the report.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, hopefully it's useful. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Great.
Caitlin's joining.
There she is.
How do I get a fancy background like you guys?
You got to go more background.
It asks you if you want to.
Oh, does it? No, look, I'm more than happy to be a CG in the distance.
Your mic's on, Claire, so you know.
Yeah, I'm turning myself off now. Bye.
All right. 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Do you speak to Suzanne often, Johanna?
Yeah, yep. Very regularly. We work on a couple of projects together, so yeah, there's always something going on.
Yeah, she's a busy lady, isn't she?
Very busy. But she actually she came to the Gold Coast not that long ago. So it's good to actually see her in person after just talking on Teams for the past 2 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we are hoping to get her here in next month actually for a big panel meeting in person, like with all the panel members. But
yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, I think her priority is at that time is to get back home or get to Europe, get to Germany, she said. So I think I understand that, obviously. So she said if she's not in Germany, she'll be with us, but she's hoping she'll be in Germany.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think traveling is becoming easier, but I noticed when she came over like a few weeks ago, it's still a bit nerve-wracking because to get back into New Zealand, at least then, she still had to have a negative test result, and there's quite a bit of COVID going around Southeast Queensland, so there's always a risk that you might get stuck. So I think if you really want to only travel if it's actually
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always going to be risky for a while, isn't it? Yeah. More blurry. I don't have my cloth with me. Getting old. How long did it take you guys to do this project for the Asian Development Bank?
Took quite a while, to be honest. There was 2 parts. So we started off with like a big literature background, sort of mapping the tourism's contribution to sustainable development, or the sustainable development goals pre-COVID. And I mean, that's across all the member countries of the Asian Development Bank, and then across all the SDGs, or sort of, sustainability areas. And then the second part was looking at the impact of COVID, and then how to move forward to increase tourism's contribution to sustainable development, and then looking at different scenarios of what the future might look like. And then we came up with our pathway. So that was the second part, and we then interviewed experts in the region and did a few other things, so a policy analysis. So all up, it took quite a while. And then actually something I guess that we learned working with large organizations like the Asian Development Bank was that we had the report was done, but it just still took quite a long time for it to be published, just going through a lot of rounds of reviews and then editing and design, and so it's just a very long process.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. It must be interesting to work with massive organisations like that, though, and see how they work. And, for a bank to fund that, they're obviously, such a high level of concern about what their investments are going to do and all the businesses they're supporting, how they're going to recover. And
totally.
Yeah.
They're very interesting. I mean, we worked with a couple of people that were leading this project, and they were really good. So I guess they were dealing with a lot of the ADB internal reviews and whatever they have to do. But that was ADB does not, or did not really focus on tourism in the past. It's not one of those development banks that has a strong footprint in tourism. So I think they've only really started that with COVID. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, cool. Hi, Lauren. We've got a few people joining. We might give everyone a couple more minutes, I think, just to join the line. How are you, Lauren?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Sorry, I haven't caught up for a while.
That's all right. Good to see you here now. Yeah. Cool. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Very well. Nice backdrop.
We're just talking about you.
Okay, well, I must have heard that.
I love your backdrop. Nice picture. Where is that?
Oh, it's in the Queen Charlotte Track, north part of the South Island.
Lovely, lovely, excellent, cool. We're just waiting for a few more people to join and then we're going to start. Yeah. You need a backdrop, Johanna. You've just got your Griffith. They need to go for that a bit.
Be official.
Yeah, I was looking for one and I was just like, yeah, that one was already uploaded. It was easy. I think I must have used it not that long ago.
Yeah. Oh, we could kick off with some introductions so that we can stick to the time schedule, should we? Yeah, so for anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Olivia Broadhurst and I'm the coordinator of the Whitsunday Climate Change Innovation Hub. The hub is a part of Whitsunday Regional Council and it looks to build the resilience of the Whitsundays and communities everywhere to climate change. But before we do start, I should just let everybody know that we are recording this webinar and it will be available on the hub website after today. So there's a couple of people I'd like to introduce. I would like to acknowledge that Suzanne Becken is on the call. She is one of the Climate Hub Advisory Panel members and has also was a lead role in delivering the Asian Development Bank study. Obviously, we have Dr Johanna Loehr here today. She is a Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the Griffith Institute for Tourism and will be providing today's presentation. Joanna's research focuses on increasing the net benefits tourism creates for the wider system in which it occurs. She did a PhD on reducing climate change risk to destinations in Vanuatu, including Vanuatu. Beyond tourism and climate change, her research interests cover sustainability, regeneration and well-being, resilience and policy making in tourism. She's got years of experience working in sustainable tourism and has delivered a webinar for us in the past, which is available also on the Hub website. So today's webinar is looking at a study recently completed for the Asian Development Bank. The report looks at how tourism system may need to be transformed to maximise its contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including action on climate change. Several pathways, levers and actions have been identified of how this may be achieved in the context of tourism's recovery from COVID. However, they're also relevant longer term. So Joanna's going to provide a 20-minute presentation. We would appreciate it if everyone can mute their microphones in the interim. At the end of the presentation, we are going to open up for some questions. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. Without further ado, Johanna, if you'd like to take over, that would be great.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, let me share my screen first of all. So I hope you can see that. Perfect. All right. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. And yeah, you've said a few words about the work that this talk is based on already. So really, I think this work builds on or sort of responds to a lot of talk that happened in response to COVID for tourism to build back or build forward better, and for the tourism system to transform to overcome some of the shortcomings that the pandemic has highlighted. And, you know, that might include the vulnerability to shocks such as the pandemic, but we also know that there's a lot of different risks and potential shocks that might impact the tourism system in the future, climate change obviously being one of them. So as Olivia said, today I want to share some work that looked at how such transformation may actually be achieved. And the focus is on the opportunities to increase tourism's contribution to sustainable development in the face of COVID recovery. So this work is based on the report that Olivia mentioned. I think she shared that actually as part of the invitation, so some of you may have seen it. Professor Zanna Becken, who's in the call, has led that work, and it was published by the Asian Development Bank. So the report really is split into three sections. First of all, we did a review of tourism pre-COVID, and in particular how tourism contributed to sustainable development in the Asia Pacific region. Then there is a section on the impact of COVID, And then the third section focuses on the opportunities that are there now as part of the recovery to foster change with the aim to increase tourism's contribution to sustainable development, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll introduce them in a bit more detail. Well, I should say that this my talk today will really focus on that third section, looking at how we move forward and how that opportunity, or the situation that we find ourselves in, can be used to rethink tourism and hopefully improve some of the outcomes that tourism can deliver. So just as a bit of really brief background, we developed this framework that underpinned our thinking, and it's based on the traditional tourism vice model that sees tourism being made up of the visitors, industry, community and culture and environment. And in our framework, tourism, through all its elements, the vice elements that you see in grey, and through an enabling environment in that white circle, contributes to sustainable development without exceeding local or global carrying capacity. And so sustainable development, like I mentioned, we defined using the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are represented in those colourful squares here. So looking at what these actually are, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them, but just a quick recap. There are 17 goals, and they stand for Sustainable Development Outcomes. And the World Tourism Organization claims that tourism contributes to all of them. And for our work, we differentiate between goals tourism can have a direct impact or contribution, and then those where tourism can have an indirect contribution. So, for example, the obvious ones where tourism has a direct impact or contribution are, of course, Goal 8, decent work and employment, and then there's Goal 12, responsible consumption and production, but also action on climate, life below water. I think these are, of course, relevant to the Whitsundays and operators in the region. Then there's a number of indirect contributions, things like alleviating poverty and hunger, contribution to clean water and sanitation, and so forth. So the idea is that tourism can or should help contribute to achieving all of those goals. And as part of our review, what the situation looked like pre-COVID, we did a review of what is called voluntary national reviews. So in those reviews, countries report on their contribution to those goals, and some of them refer to the role that tourism plays in that as well. So what you can see here is a mapping of those reports from countries in the Asia Pacific. And what we can see really clearly is, of course, that tourism contributes to those to work and employment, also to responsible consumption and production, what we expected, and some of those others. So, there's some contribution across a lot of those goals, even if not actually that many, if you look at the numbers. Importantly, those reports actually also recognise that tourism can have a negative impact. So there's a risk that tourism, or through tourism activity, the progress on those goals can be compromised. So if we look at those areas, it's life below water and life on land are probably the most significant ones. Even climate action is recognised. We all know that tourism contributes to global greenhouse gas emissions. So we could go into detail of each of them, but this is just a really brief sort of summary. And yeah, of course, the goal is then to maximise tourism's contribution across all of those goals, not just those ones that stand for economic contribution, and then minimise tourism's negative effect on those goals. So, and then came COVID. And I really don't want to dwell on this. I think this has been discussed over and over. We all understand that it had a really big impact. And, you would have felt that as well in the Whitsundays. I guess point here is that that moment or that shock provided an opportunity for people to sit back and rethink or reflect on tourism practices. I think it highlighted or made a lot of people realize that tourism is actually quite vulnerable. I think a lot of people didn't realize. And yeah, it provides this opportunity now where there is a lot of thinking and investment in recovery. A lot of tourism recovery strategies are being developed, and yeah, that provides an opportunity to do things differently. So, so what was the tourism policy response to COVID? And we asked ourselves the question whether those policies or the actions and initiatives that those policies set out to implement actually lead to a transformation or significant changes within the tourism system. So as part of the work for the Asian Development Bank, we conducted a review of national tourism policy response measures, and we found that there was basically 3 broad types of categories of policies, and these covered or can be classified into untargeted support schemes, so things like the job retention schemes. We had JobKeeper in Australia. They were offered to all companies. They weren't tourism specific. Then there were sectoral schemes that were targeted specifically at tourism, and these could have been specific training programs or workforce support programs, or the support of tourism crisis committees. And then there were also very specific business support programs. So examples there would be providing loans to specific tourism companies, the nationalization of strategically important firms such as airlines as well. And so across all of those different policies, and so the mapping again was done across the countries in the Asia Pacific, and we mainly looked at national policy. So these measures were aimed at creating outcomes at different timescales, ranging from short term, so really focused at an immediate crisis response, and then medium term to long term. Those are focused more on creating long-term resilience and sustainability. And what we found was that there were a wide range of measures that focused on really securing immediate outcomes, such as around health and safety, of course, with the border closures, and providing fiscal or monetary support to keep businesses afloat. So the key policy focus of those recovery policies in tourism was to re-establish business as usual, and that as quickly as possible. So looking at that diagram on the right, those policies refer to the old paradigm, which is represented by that first line on the left graph of the paragraph. The policy responses focused on medium and especially longer term outcomes were less common, and those that we found were mainly what could be described as bridge builders. For example, skills and capacity building programs, including retaining workers or repositioning destinations. There was a lot of talk around attracting domestic tourists and also investing in new assets. So importantly, there were very little policies that really took a long-term focus that were aimed at creating a very new system for tourism or really drive significant change. And things that we were looking at here were, for example, attaching sustainability criteria to financial support packages. And just as an example, one example that we did find in France, not relevant for our region, but just to give an example, was the bailout of Air France, where France has actually attached the condition that the airline drops all short-haul routes that compete with rail in exchange for the bailout. So that really then creates a system shift where that leads to changes in how people travel domestically in France. So that would have been one of those longer term or initiative with longer term outcomes. So are these findings surprising? Similar to tourism's COVID response, existing tourism policy does not typically focus on sustainability. Of course, there are exceptions, but if we're just looking at general tourism policy, you can see we've mapped those typical policy areas. They focus on things like growth and productivity and competitiveness. So now I want to show you what greening such typical policies could look like. If you look at that row down the bottom, and of course these are relevant when we consider the aim of broadening the sustainability outcomes tourism may contribute to. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but for example, looking at resource efficiency and managing capacity, these are all things that really provide proactive and a no regret approach, especially if you consider the uncertainty that the tourism system is currently facing and will continue to face in the future. And so I will go into more detail and get back to those over my next slides. So we developed 6 pathways for tourism to build forward better, and these were really informed by the thinking around the existing tourism system, what I've discussed, but also we drew on experts in the Asia Pacific region, the literature review, and so forth. So these 6 pathways were really developed to provide decision makers with some insights into how the tourism system can be transformed, and recognizing that transformation is challenging because it requires a proactive change of key levers. So what you can see here is next to those 6 pathways are a number of levers, and these may be different for each destination based on the unique context. So these key levers provide decision makers with indications where to intervene in the system, and I'll walk through those in a bit more detail over the next slides. So this is a summary of the recommendations which were framed or are framed for policymakers, first of all, but I do want to highlight that they are also relevant for the private sector and other organizations involved in tourism, as we'll see. So collaboration on those is really important. And before I move on, I also want to highlight that each destination will have different priorities, and tourism stakeholders may focus on pathways or recommendations that align best with their own tourism strategy. So it doesn't mean that, or we're not suggesting that every destination has to implement all of those. There might be priorities based on the unique context. So in the Whit Sundays, we know there's already a focus on climate change action with the Healthy Heart Reef project that the Hub is implementing. So obviously the pathway decarbonising tourism is probably relevant, and there may be others as well, but maybe not all of them. So, okay. So moving on, I will now spend the rest of the presentation talking about each of those 6 pathways and provide some examples. So the first pathway is value-driven tourism, and we are really seeing this or hearing about this a lot. There's a lot of mention of value in tourism recovery strategies and the notion of seeking quality over quantity. So we have to really ask, who are visitors that are high value? What does that even mean? What do we mean by high value visitors? Are these tourists that spend more, or those that want to interact and genuinely contribute to the destination, the environment, or the host community? And then, of course, we need to also think about how do we then find those, and how can they be attracted? There might also be a combination of those. So we might actually want visitors who spend a lot, but at the same time, they should have a low carbon footprint. So I think every destination, again, might have different ideas or values of what the ideal high-value tourist looks like. But really having those discussions and defining them is really important if this is a priority area. And so one example to attract high-value visitors would be to develop products that add value and leverage local resources. So, and doing that responsibly. That could be through nature walks or tours and using local or Indigenous guides, products with high service components, providing rich and authentic experiences. They may involve an educational component, offer local food and beverages. So of course, working with other local suppliers shortens the supply chains and also then reduces leakages. So then there's like positive flow and effects to the wider community and destination. So the second lever for this pathway is managing the destination's carrying capacity. And this really requires understanding the social and ecological limits. So, I mean, I know I flicked through this really quickly, but if you remember that our framework that I showed in the VICE model, it was a circle at the outer edge that represented those limits. So everything that tourism does, you know, the contribution that we would like tourism to achieve, they have to happen without crossing those limits. Of course, this also requires adequate data, so we understand what those limits are, and then planning and enforcement to ensure that the resources of a destination are managed well or responsibly. So then, thirdly, we have the lever of measuring success. And I think this is also not news to the Whitsundays. I mean, the use of sustainability indicators really means that we go and measure tourism's impact beyond those traditional economic contributions. And I know you work with EarthCheck, and they obviously do that, so that's really good. And again, this is relevant not just for the destination, but for each individual business. There is actually an example here that I wanted to highlight because it's quite interesting, and we've got a case study of that in the report, and that's that of Planet Happiness. So they take a bit of a different approach. Whereas EarthCheck works with the businesses and the destination, Planet Happiness really focuses on the residents. And so one of their local regions they work with is in Victoria, the Goldfields. And that's a region made up out of 13 council, and they engage their residents in this happiness survey. And the survey really goes beyond just quantitative measures of well-being. So in addition to things like employment rates and education levels, they go and ask subjective questions of how people feel. And that then, first of all, provides really rich data, but also offers a starting point to have discussions with the community of around well-being, and then in their case, you know, how tourism can contribute to achieving that as part of the COVID recovery. And so Planet Happiness actually also works with the Department of Tourism in Vanuatu, and they have really placed a very strong focus on community well-being as part of their tourism COVID recovery. So I think in that case, if community well-being is in focus, then that's an interesting approach. And I've added the link here because this survey is available for anyone to do, and it's actually quite interesting to see what questions are asked, and also you get a scorecard, and I think it gives you a well-being score, and I don't know, I think you can compare it to an average, but just for anyone who's interested. Okay, the second pathway is decarbonizing tourism, and of course, very much relevant, and again, to reiterate, but I'm sure you know, measurement here is really important to manage and reduce the sector's carbon footprint. And the Whitsundays is doing obviously work on that with the Healthy Reef project and the work that EarthCheck does. So you're well on the way to do that. But also, it is important for businesses to reduce emissions. Everyone has a responsibility, and so therefore also for individual businesses to start measuring and understanding their carbon footprints. This is really because knowing that will provide indications of where initiatives are most effective, and then measuring over time will also provide a tool to or provide feedback if those measures were actually successful. So if solar was implemented, or if operating procedures were changed, how much was saved, what was the return on investment, and that information I think is so critical for operators. We see here actually there's a couple of images of initiatives, so there's actually a lot happening in this space, and there has been. We always say with Susanna that there's always circles, and I mean there's a lot of tools available that have been available for a very long time, and they seem to repeat. But just as one point, the work by the World Tourism Travel Council, they highlight that they see the private sector play an important role as an investor into a green transition. So they really highlight that the private sector does have a responsibility. So just to get back to the those experiences, reducing emissions at a business level, I think sharing that information is valuable because that might not be so readily available, and those lived experiences, I think operators that I have talked to or worked with in the past, they have always said that that is so valuable. So, you know, the hub probably provides a platform that is facilitating that to a degree. There might be others, but again, that just goes to show that it is important that businesses start engaging and understanding their own footprint. So once the baseline is established, obviously there's a need to set targets. There are broad targets. Those, you know, individual targets can be in line with that, or I guess they should be, or they can be more ambitious. And for, say, at a destination level, it is important to translate what those targets mean for each of the different actors. So what does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for the tourism body, and so forth? Governments, obviously, they're really important to support that process. They can invest in innovation, and they can support long-term commitments and partnerships and programs, and they can also help pilot new approaches. Another thing that the private sector or tourism sector in general can do is to lobby government for support. I think that is also really important. Support for example, to upgrade key infrastructure that the businesses depend on, that is still quite carbon or energy intense, so it could be local energy or waste infrastructure, and of course transport. So sustainable fuel, aviation fuels is a big one, or marine fuels. So transport is a big issue in tourism when it comes to carbon footprint, and we saw that from work that was conducted in the Great Barrier Reef, that the transport to and from the islands of people, but also products and waste as well, just makes up such a big chunk of carbon emissions. So then we have knowledge. That's another lever helping to decarbonize tourism, and that involves increasing, of course, knowledge and carbon literacy. That could be done through educational and training programs, implementing reporting mechanisms. Certification also helps with creating awareness and carbon literacy and things like that. But also visitor pledges, for example, if, you know, as an initiative to create awareness with the visitors. All right, moving on to the next pathway, and that's tourism-led regeneration. And you've probably heard about the regenerative concept before. It's becoming quite popular. Regeneration means replenishing or repairing. So for tourism, that would mean not just preserving or conserving what is already there, and that's often done with sustainability, but going a step further and actively restoring or improving an ecosystem, for example. So I think that's also relevant for for the Whitsundays, and I know a lot of operators are actually already doing so much in that space, looking at the recovery from bleaching and things like that. So here I want to talk about this framework, and this is actually something that Susanne has developed. And so later on, Susanne, if you want to say anything about or add anything, feel free. So this is this tree is part of a values-based tourism system, and Susanne developed that with a colleague from the Department of Conservation in New Zealand, and it really provides a framework that portrays tourism as a living system, and I think that's really valuable actually to see tourism through that lens. This framework aims to support the work of the Department of Conservation and then hopefully also that of other tourism agencies. So that framework was developed based out of a discussion on what high value means, so exactly what we've been talking about, and also in the context that tourism needs to transform. And there's a lot of good work actually coming out of New Zealand in that space. So back to the framework, it recognizes that for tourism to thrive or flourish, we need, first of all, a healthy root base. And so the roots of the tree, they represent values, norms and agreements and codes of ethics, for example, but also different types of knowledge and wisdom. So science, but importantly also local or indigenous knowledge. And that obviously creates the base upon which everything else happens and upon which the tree stands. So when tourism thrives, it contributes to all well-being. So in New Zealand, they're using a well-being framework that is built on 4 different capitals. So that's represented here with the crown of the tree, and that crown, or you can say the fruits of the tree, represents really what tourism delivers, the outcomes that tourism produces. So to achieve this, this green crown, or the ripe fruit of the trees, it is sometimes necessary to restore the healthy root system first, and we have to look at the whole tree, or the health of the whole tree first, before we can expect those outcomes. So the tree also shows that tourism needs to give back. So there's arrows pointing down, so that everyone benefits, and also that the tree flourishes. So it's really, again, ensuring that the whole tree or system is healthy. There's different ways of doing this, of course. This could be done through levies and taxes, but also through education of visitors and locals, and so forth. And I think we touched on those different things throughout the different pathways. So, of course, measurement and monitoring is key. Again, indicators are needed for each of those well-being areas. And importantly, there may also be a limit for how tall the tree can grow. So it's really important to recognize the different branches that do not add value, or that are too long and outgrow others. And so I guess that refers back to our discussion on the carrying capacity. So you can also look at the tree and then refer to the threat of shocks and stress from the outside, and that links to the discussion on the need to build resilience. And in this case, really, the knowledge and wisdom and a strong root base protects the tree from such external shocks. So again, it just goes to show that how important the foundations really are. So in summary, in New Zealand, they really see the future of tourism as one that ensures tourism to contribute to all types of well-being locally. So really delivering more holistic outcomes. They see tourism as being regenerative in nature, and yeah, that means not doing harm, but responding to change and continuing to thrive. So to put this framework in practice and to provide a more local example is that of Lady Elliot Island, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the great work that they're doing. So this is a practical example. Lady Elliot Island was actually stripped bare, and the work that Peter Gash and team have done is amazing. As you can see in the photo here, they've replanted large parts, or most parts of the island actually. They do a lot more than that. So the island runs almost 100% on renewable energy. They've got desalination and hydro panels to produce fresh water. So they're actually trialing innovative approaches there. They've got programs to engage schools and guests in their restoration and conservation. They've got an education centre as well as a visitor pledge. So really trying to engage the visitors in the work that they're doing. There's a citizen science project, and I mean the list goes on. The zero carbon transport, I think that's an ambition for the future. So yeah, overall, this is a really good example of what can be done in terms of regenerative tourism. Okay, moving on. So the fourth pathway that we identified was diversification, and that can be done through a number of ways. So the first lever is diversification of markets, and revising destination marketing strategies can really help reduce the dependence on one dominant market. And I think COVID really highlighted the problem of that. So a lot of people are aware of the dangers. Policymakers, I think, now are looking at building or strengthening closer to home markets, domestic markets, and it's also really important to align markets with the DNA of the destination. So that goes back to the discussion of the type of visitors a destination wants to attract, and how does that line up with what the destination stands for and what the destination wants tourism to achieve. And so, of course, in that discussion, one also needs to ensure that the carrying capacities are respected. So yeah, there might be limits to how many people a destination can accommodate. Then the next lever is to diversify products, and again, we've seen that more and more products are aimed at the domestic market, products that give back or prioritize community needs, for example. And I don't know if I mentioned that in the other previous webinar that I gave, but I did a sailing tour in the Whitsundays actually in 2020, so during COVID, and the captain told us that they had completely changed their tour offerings because they used to sail mainly international visitors, and they wanted short trips, just see the big attractions, 2 days, 2 nights, and then get out. Whereas he said now the domestic visitors actually want longer trips. They prefer to travel slower. They want to go to like not the busy spots. So he said that's changed like the way they operate completely. It means he's on the water for longer, but it also means he has more time at home. He doesn't have to rush to turn the boat around. And so I think that was really interesting. He said it's really improved things for the better, I guess, and that might just be one example, one that I experienced, but that is an example of how operators just tailor their product, and in that case it was in line with I guess his well-being. Another example, and that's international, is, and not from the Asia Pacific, that is relevant here, is Untourism Amsterdam. I think this is always a really fun website to look at. This was developed in response to the over-tourism problem that they had pre-COVID, and it provides some really good examples and very creative examples of how tourists can give back to the community or different social or environmental causes. So just to give an example, in the middle here, that's a previous refugees that take tourists around on their refugee boat, showing them the canals of Amsterdam. So they are sharing their stories, their history, and obviously that provides them with employment. Another one is like upcycling workshops where tourists collect rubbish or waste in the city and then take that and create their own souvenirs. So there's like a lot of very creative and interesting tourist experiences that all give back in some way. Then we've got as a third lever, diversification of the workforce, and I think that mainly that's around actively encouraging minority groups to apply. That can be supported through company policies, supporting vulnerable employees, obviously providing job training and education so that the skills are developed, especially transferable skills are important, and ideally those that support tourism workers to change industries if they wish to, and this may actually increase employee satisfaction, so that the business may actually see benefits. It's not just for the employees. There's also initiatives where tourism staff are being trained as first response personnel, or there's opportunities to do that, to then provide support in emergency situations. So often tourism staff are actually the ones that are out in the field, maybe on boats or tours or in taxis. So if a disaster happens, and these people are trained as first responders, it provides a big advantage and can increase the resilience of the destination. So, and then lastly, we've got economic diversification. That's really just to say that there's a need to reduce reliance on tourism as the one one main economic sector, by seeking opportunities for diversification and looking for ways of how tourism can be integrated into other sectors, things like agriculture or health. And the public sector can support this process by really providing businesses that may not be able to survive shocks like COVID to develop exit strategies. So all of those different types of diversifications or levers ensure that the local tourism sector and offerings remain relevant and viable and attractive for both staff and the visitors. Okay, I've got two more, and I don't actually want to go into too much detail here because I know there are a lot of operators in the room, but the fifth pathway was governance, and there's a few main points here. So the first one is policy integration, and that really means that, or policy integration across sectors. So in the case of climate change, that, for example, means that tourism policy considers climate change and vice versa, and that the goals and targets align across those sectors and not contradict each other. So we often see, for example, in tourism, policies or strategies, certain growth goals and decarbonisation goals and climate change policies. But if they're standalone, it is often not clear how one can be achieved without compromising the other. So if those policies are integrated, the sectors work together, then first of all, discussions can be had and strategies can be developed of how both can be achieved or a compromise can be found. Then there's collaboration for planning across sectors. Across sectors and public-private partnerships. So there's a lot of opportunities around that. One of them is the development of sustainability standards. And, you know, obviously also inputting into planning and so forth. And then there is adaptive management, and this is really, or an example therefore could be, again, to foster the links between tourism and the humanitarian sector. So similar to what I said before, thinking about identifying how tourism assets, including tourism staff, can be used in times of crisis. As part of COVID, we saw that with the hotels that were repurposed, but again, it could be transport mechanisms, it could be the taxis or the boats in remote communities that then provide modes for evacuation or things like that. So this discussion is really also relevant for the climate risk, because I think we can confidently say that more shocks will happen in the future. So this really links in well in the wider discussion on resilience. Okay, and I know I'm probably over time, but this is the last one. So this is the last pathway is on finance, aligning tourism finance with sustainability. So green finance really means financing sustainability. I'm not a finance expert, but I think we found that there is a great potential for the governments and private sector to seek new sources of financing that will help enhance the sustainability of tourism. There's a lot of green investment opportunities for tourism around buildings and efficiency gains and water and waste management and so forth. So we need new ways to finance that transition. Examples could be through fiscal instruments, taxes and so forth. For local governments, it could be through bed taxes or entry fees, or through parking and things like that. And then this mandatory pricing could be complemented through voluntary contributions by visitors or businesses. The public sector can also promote access to green finance and help businesses gain access by providing grants or subsidized loans, again with environmental or sustainability criteria attached. So I think I've mentioned that earlier. There could be tailored support for businesses to gain access to those grants and providing public credit guarantees for those loans. And so one example, and maybe that's the only one, I don't know, but Langham Hotel Group based in Hong Kong, they've got hotels in Australia as well. They have secured a big loan that is linked to their hotel's sustainability performance. So that was, I think, one of the first in the hospitality sector, and that sustainability performance is monitored and measured by EarthCheck, and therefore they can prove that to the banks. And I think the performance is then linked to their interest rates. So that's one example of where that's already happening. So to wrap up really briefly, I guess to conclude, tourism is an important contributor to the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot of potentials. COVID, as we said, presents an opportunity to enhance tourism's contribution and change the tourism model. However, in doing that, significant change is required. And we talked about those 6 pathways of how that might be achieved. Governments have an important role to play, but that needs to be supported by the private sector through collaboration and input. Yeah, and then I guess ensuring that tourism connects to other momentum, regeneration, circular economy, green finance, all of those also provides an important opportunity. Thanks, Olivia. That was it. A bit longer. I hope you are all still there.
Thanks, Johanna. That was really interesting. So can I ask the first question?
Of course. Do you want me to stop sharing the screen or?
Yeah, sure. If you want to stop sharing, that'd be great. And what I'm wondering is what are the steps now getting followed by the Asian Development Bank now that they've received this report? Are you privy to that?
Yeah, well, a little bit. So I think the first step was really to get the report out there, to share it with all their partners. And yeah, I think Susanna can attest to that. There was a lot of presenting the findings at different webinars and events to make decision makers aware of the findings. Of course, the aim was to influence the recovery and the response strategies moving forward. I think at the very beginning, we said that, it took a while for the report to be released, but I think it's still very much relevant. We've had some really good discussions in the events that I attended. I don't know if Susanna wants to say anything about that, but yeah, obviously still very much relevant. And so I think the first step was really to get the information out. The Asian Development Bank I think sees that as a piece of work that will support their partner or member countries in the tourism recovery, and it might hopefully also channel investment into those areas. But I'm not aware of like a very specific project or investment project that has come out. Susanna, do you want to add something?
I might just add briefly, because I think one thing that the Asian Development Bank was after was a slightly more sophisticated view of tourism than they had previously. So in the past, they threw money at big projects like airports or cruise ship terminals or routes, and then not quite thinking, well, if I build a big route to a coastal resort, what's going to happen? And they kind of lacked that understanding, and I think that's why we sort of almost went back to square one to start with. And so the second thing, they're looking at creating tourism as a standalone portfolio, because they have your traditional transport, sanitation, that kind of stuff. But because tourism, I guess, has emerged as such an important lifeline in many of the member countries, they realize we need to do something, we need to do it right. So I think that's part of that discussion.
Excellent. That's really interesting. Does anyone else have any questions for Johanna or Suzanne? Code silence. Well, if anyone does have questions,
I had an observation to make, and that was when you were talking about the contribution of the visitor and the staff on the ground. It's interesting because I've been talking a lot with our partners, our operators in the area, and one thing they really said is if we can get our crew to be doing the right thing and saying the right things and to be demonstrating, great behaviours, then that filters through to the visitors as well. So is that something that the bank, I suppose in your study, has brought out the importance of that in those local communities? I'm particularly thinking of the Asian communities. Just interested on your thoughts in that area.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly something that we looked at, of how visitors can be engaged through different ways. Obviously, staff, that staff on the ground, that's the first contact, and there's a lot of potential need for capacity building. I think that's something that we identified: capacity building at all levels. In terms of the specific recommendations, because the report was funded by the Asian Development, the recommendations were aimed at probably not so much the operator level, but more at the policy level. But nevertheless, there is a section on the visitors, and how that interaction happens. And I think we talk about sustainability pledges, so how that's a way to engage visitors and hopefully make them feel a bit more responsible for the actions and their behaviour when they come and visit a destination. So there are some case studies like that in the report. So yeah, we looked at it. It's one of the elements of the tourism system. But yeah, I think some of the recommendations touch on it, but there's not a specific section with recommendations that focuses on that area as such.
I had a question, Olivia, if nobody else does, and maybe it's just for everyone, because there's a lot of interest just now in the cruise ship industry and the return to Australian waters. And I guess just, Johanna, as you were showing the tree and the 2 years pause to think and maybe ask the values of the destination and the communities. And I mean, I don't know, maybe the cruise ship industry has done it or they have not done it. I guess it would have been the time to actually go to the place and say, okay, what do you actually want and how many? Anyway, so I just wondered if anyone has a view and whether they're coming to the Whitsundays now, and whether there's been a shift to sustainability in that space.
Anyone else online is across that, but I know that I've heard, whispers about there being, plans for cruise ships to be returning to Queensland. I'm not sure if it's in the next year or so, but I'm not fully across that. I'm not sure what the plans are or when that's going to be happening. And does anyone else online know about the cruise ships or have any opinions on the cruise ships?
I'm pretty sure the cruise ships will be starting up very, very shortly. There's two have hit Australian waters, and I believe one of them's based out of Brisbane. Could be heading up our way in the next month or two.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to follow a little bit. I guess it comes to one of those pathways around governance, because sometimes I try to understand a bit more who makes those decisions, like the local port company or the council, or so. And I always find there's very little information, but all of a sudden there's a cruise ship, and then you have to deal with it. So it's sort of almost a prime example to test some of those pathways that Johanna, that you presented.
I'll take that away as some homework, Suzanne. I'll go and look into that. That is really interesting. All right, well, if anyone has any other questions, you can email through to me, and I will send them through to Johanna and respond. But I'd like to thank Johanna for coming along and providing that presentation. It was really interesting. It's always great for us to understand what research is happening in other areas and to really make sure that we're across and that we can learn from the research that's happening and see how we can implement it to make our tourism system work as well as possible. So thank you for coming and presenting to us. We will do a little edit on this video, and then we will have it up on our website under our webinars section, but I will also share the recording as soon as it's available with everyone that's registered. So thank you all for coming, and yeah, please keep an eye out, because hopefully we will keep rolling out more webinars like this in the future as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank
and
you.
everyone. Great to be with you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Jo.
Bye.
Bye. Well, thank you, Jo. That was really good. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's good. It went a bit longer. There's just a lot to cover. I mean, like you said, the report is so long. I didn't want to leave any of the pathways out, of course. So I focused on the ones that I thought were most relevant. But yeah.
Yeah, Michael's just asking in the chat, can we share the material? So are you happy to share your presentation?
Yeah, we can share the presentation. Yep. Sure.
Yeah.
It's basic. I mean, there's a couple of extra examples, but most of it is in the report as well. So it's, yeah, I can share those. Yeah, I'll send you the PDFs.
All right, that'll be excellent. Cool. Well, I'll circulate them to everybody in the next few days.
Great.
Cool. Thank you,
Well, thanks for
Jo.
organising, Olivia. Always
All
good
right.
to be with you. Okay.
Yeah,
See ya.
thank you. Cheers. Bye.